All righty, you lovely people. I hope you had a good snack. I know I did. I always do. I like my pleasure. I'm a bit of a hedonist, I guess. In any case, the last video had just ended with, again, I think us uncovering the first major part of classical utilitarianism. Again, this idea that morality should only focus on the overall pleasure and absence of pain. So again, morality should be promoting pleasure in everyone and diminishing pain in everyone. And I, of course, left you with a little clickbait. I love making these little clickbait ads. They're fun. Again, wondering, how is Bentham going to measure pleasure and pain? And this is what people today, Bentham didn't use this language. I will, though. It's called a felicific calculus. I hope I'm saying that right. This literally just means a felicific calculus literally just means a system of calculating and promoting happiness. That's what a calculus, felicific does. It's about, measuring and promoting happiness, a system for doing that. Now, if you look on page 42 of the reading, so jump on over to page 42. Here we can kind of see Bentham laying out how he's going to measure pleasure and pain. So first, it'll involve intensity. That is, how strong or weak is the pleasure or pain? And then the second element, duration. How long does the pleasure or pain last? Certainty. How sure is it that the pleasure or the pain will actually happen? Oh, here's another fun word, propinquity. Oh man, that's a wild one. I don't know no one uses that anymore. Propinquity. I'm probably completely saying it wrong. Will the pleasure or pain happen now or later? A better word might be like proximity. Is it happening now, or is this something that's going to happen later? And then we have fecundity. That is a nice little word again, fecundity. And this is asking, will there be more of the same? So will we have a pleasure that's followed by more pleasure? Will we have a pain that's followed by more pain? That's the fecundity. And then we have finally the purity. And that's the idea is, will there be some of the opposite mixed in? So is this a pleasure that has a little pain involved in it? Is this a pain that has a little pleasure? Is it kind of mixed up? How pure is it? Is it pure happiness, pure pain, or some kind of mixture? And now, actually, if you've taken a course on econ, maybe like microecon especially, you might have talked about utility theory, maybe utility theory or expected utility. And I tell you what, a lot of Bentham's ideas have been now formalized in what the people today do call expected utility theory, which all those things I just mentioned, again, all those things, I'll throw it back up there on page 42. A lot of these things can be measured now. There are models and tools that people use to do this. It's quite wild. So it's kind of neat that a lot of Bentham's ideas here have been formally, mathematicized in probability and statistics and utility theory. So Bentham's ideas have had influence, certainly, on modern economics. In any case, it now looks like when we look at this list, again, on page 42 there, lots of different pleasures, lots of different pains. There's near ones, far ones, strong ones, weak ones, long ones, short ones, pure ones, impure ones. It looks like we get all sorts of different kinds of pleasures and pains that are possible, because pleasure and pains have all these different qualities that he's listed there. And also, of course, pleasures occur in different people. So not only do we have near ones, far ones, strong ones, weak ones, we also have Professor Gray's pleasures, your pleasures, our pains, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what Bentham is going to say is all these different things, all these different pleasures, all these different pains and different people and different lengths and all that stuff is going to be reduced to one commonality. If you look on page 44, Bentham says that on page 44 there, he says, pains and pleasures may be called by one general word, interesting perceptions. Now, the idea is that these interesting perceptions, if they're pleasurable, they're interesting and they draw us in. We're like, ooh, I like that. But they can also be interesting if they're pains, interesting in the sense that they kind of push us. We're like, I don't want that. So these are interesting perceptions or things that draw us in or push us away. And that's the kind of commonality that I think we're seeing with interesting perceptions. And this might be why Bentham is going to call, what's that commonality, this interestingness? I think he's going to call that utility. Because utility will then give us a way to measure how much is it drawing us in versus how much is it pushing us back. Is it really drawing us in because it's very pleasurable, or is it kind of not because there's a little pain there? It's just, it's really bad, really painful. Push away. So again, I think utility is going to be a general idea of how to measure the interestingness of the experience, of the sensation. Is it drawing us in? That's really good, really high, or is it starting to push us back and it gets more and more, worse? Bad, so that's what utility is. And so again, this is the key idea with Bentham, is that he's going to measure pleasure and pain with what he's going to call, as I've mentioned already, utility. And this is where I think we get the second big piece of classical utilitarianism, because the first big piece of utilitarianism, again, says what we're interested in from a moral perspective is overall pleasure and absence of pain. And he's told us we're going to measure this overall pleasure over pain using something called utility. And now we get the second step, which we can call this calculus, or as I prefer, the total view. And this total view has three parts: quantitative monism, sum ranking, and optimization. These things are going to help flesh out exactly how Bentham is going to measure this stuff. So the first half, again, the first key tenet says we're going to measure overall pleasure over pain. The second, the total view, will then tell us how it's done. I hope that's making sense about how this all these things are fitting together. And I think understanding this total view will then flesh out and complete our understanding of Bentham's Felicific calculus, and also, of course, complete the picture for classical utilitarianism. And Mr. Green, in his little video there, on utilitarianism, I think he gives a nice little example that I'll use, because I think it's perfectly simple, it's straightforward, and I think we all understand it. And this is the example where you've been asked by your family to pick where you get to go to celebrate your birthday dinner. And now your choices are between Thai food and Chinese food. Why it's those choices, I don't know, but that was his example, so I'll stick to it. Now, according to classical utilitarianism, as we said, you should look over at the overall pleasure produced by each option, or the overall utility produced by each option. And so the total view will tell us how to do that. Now, quantitative monism, the first part of the total view, quantitative monism says individual well-being is measured numerically and specifically by one numerical quantity. This quantity is usually called utility. And I think we can see this. If we look on page 18 in Bentham, jump over there to page 18, you can see Bentham where he says, a thing is said to promote the interests or be for the interests of an individual when it tends to add to the sum total of his pleasure. Add to the sum total of his pleasures. And later, let's just jump ahead really quickly to page 42. Bentham expands on this idea here where he says, sum up the values of all the pleasures on one side and of all the pains on the other. If the balance is on the side of pleasure, that is the overall good tendency of the act with respect to the interests of that person. And so again, it's the idea, look at the language. He's talking about sum totals adding to. He's clearly using the language of numbers. And he's saying those numbers will just be called the utility of the action. If it's a high number, it's lots of pleasure, lots of utility, very good. If it's a low number, if it's a negative number, now we're getting into it being painful and bad. Again, this is the idea of quantitative monism. Monism just meaning one thing, monism. I don't know, maybe you don't know that, but yeah, monism means one thing. And quantitative, you hopefully know that's referring to numbers. So a quantitative monism is just saying we're going to be measuring well-being using one number, and that number will be called utility, which is representing the overall pleasure minus the pain, if you will. Balance it, do the math. He's saying crunch the numbers. And so that means when choosing between Thai food and Chinese food, going back to now our example for birthday dinner, you look at the Thai food option, he says. Is the pleasure strong or weak? Is the pleasure you get from Thai food short or long? Is the pleasure certain or uncertain? You go through all this stuff about the pleasures and pains with Thai food, and you'll do for all those other elements, near purity and all the rest. And quantitative monism just says all those pleasures and pains that you associate with Thai food will be reduced to one number. And so in this case, I'll just say, that you get a utility of 10 for Thai food. And of course, you'll go do the exact same thing for Chinese food to determine the utility you have, again, the pleasure over pain you get for for Chinese food now. And in this, it seems that, we put up the numbers there, and it seems that, okay, well, Thai food has a bigger number than Chinese food, so you seem to like Thai food more than Chinese food. And yeah, that just means you like Thai food more than Chinese food. Nothing big deal about it. Yay, Thai food. Get the red curry. Of course, utilitarianism says we don't just decide on what you want. We have to consider the overall pleasure and pain. So that is, we have to bring in your family here. And as you can see here, it seems like you are the only person in your family who really likes Thai food. Everyone else seems to get more utility or more pleasure from the Chinese option, the Chinese food. And so, of course, we can then ask, okay, well, now that we know the individual utilities for everyone involved, the individual pleasures over pains for everyone, how do we choose? Now, I'm pretty sure you've all figured this out. Once you throw numbers on there, I think this is pretty obvious where we're going, but I will do it slowly just to flesh it all out, to keep, so we're all on the same page here. Because if you go back to the total view, we see the second part of the total view is sum ranking. And sum ranking says that overall well-being is the aggregate utility for the group. And you might say, okay, Mr. Smarty Professor, aggregate, that's a big $5 word, $10 word. I don't know, how much is it worth? But what is the aggregate utility of the group? Well, let's go back to page 18. Let's look at what Bentham says. Page 18, where he says that the interest of the community is then what? And he answers, the sum of the interests of the several members who compose it. Again, let's jump on ahead to page 42. Again, Bentham says here, he says, repeat the above process with respect to each. Sum up the numbers. Take the balance, which if on the side of pleasure will give the general good tendency of the act with respect to the total number or community of individuals involved. And so here's what we can start to see. We can start, it's probably painfully obvious now. Again, he's using all this math language of summing up. So I think you know where this is going. But again, let's just flesh it out. So let's go back to this sum ranking view. So again, sum ranking says it's the aggregate utility, and this is going to be based on two claims now. So first, we see that each person in the group has an individual utility value associated with their own personal well-being. Hey, no surprises there. Remember, we had the chart here. I'll throw it up again. The chart with there. Yeah, we see what my utility values are, your utility values are, and your family's utility values. Yeah, we got them all there. That's the first part of sum ranking. So let's now go back. And what's the second part of sum ranking? It says the aggregate utility for the group is calculated by summing up these individual utilities. Yeah, those are just the quotes I just read from Bentham, right? You just sum up the individual utilities of all the people in the community, all the individuals involved. He just says, again, Bentham's idea. That's why we have utility. It's nice. It's numbers. Numbers allow for math, and nothing easier than adding up some numbers. And so so we figure out the aggregate utility by just summing up everyone's individual utility. So let's go back to the birthday dinner. We sum up the utility for each choice. Boom. And here we see that Thai food has a total utility of 18 for the group, whereas the Chinese food has a total utility of 22 for the group. And so, okay, now we got the utility of the group there. How do we decide which option to pick? I hope now it's really, you're like, Professor, we get it. I'm still going to walk you through it. Just to make sure we're all on the same page. Because look, if you look on a footnote on page, I think it's 17, look on page 17, that footnote there, it's like the first footnote. Bentham does say the greatest happiness of all those whose interest is in question as being the right and proper and only right and proper and universally desirable end of human happiness. So again, he is talking about the greatest happiness or the greatest pleasure or the greatest utility. And this is just a statement of optimization. The last part of the total view is optimization, which says more aggregate utility is always better than less aggregate utility. So I think you know where we're going now. Let's go back to that birthday example. We want to pick the option that has the greatest happiness, the greatest utility, the greatest pleasure. And of course, that is Chinese food. And so that's what you should pick if you're a good classical utilitarianism. Mr. Green went through that whole example. I did it a lot shorter because I wanted to flesh out all these elements of the total view. Lots of assumptions going into this very simple idea of just adding up the utility. Because again, we have to assume there's a numerical quantity that we can measure for each individual. Then we can just sum up, and then we can use that to calculate the utility of the group. And then we can use that number to make our decision in all the ways we just talked about. And so, yeah, there they are. Let's throw that slide back up. We've just talked about all these. You're really smart now. Be proud. I hope you guys are proud. You guys are getting through so much cool stuff here, and that's really cool. Yeah, utilitarianism seems simple, but it's got a lot going on in it. All these things. And like I said, there's even more things I could mention that I'm being merciful and not. But yeah, look at all these. Let's throw it back up again. Now you know the first three parts here, that is consequentialism, welfarism, hedonism. That gives us the idea that morality only focuses on the overall pleasure and the absence of pain. So that tells us what we're after, overall pleasure. And then the second part, the last part, the total view, That gives us the precision that Bentham wants to have for his Felicific calculus of measuring utility and calculating and making decisions. So yeah, wow, yeah, we did it. Yes, pat yourself on the back, remove the arm flab. That's classical utilitarianism, baby, you got it. And that's another module we're almost done with. So yeah, pat yourself on the back, remove that arm flab. Oh, you're getting through this. This is awesome, right? You're almost done with another module. So you know what to do now. Take that quiz, tweet a little, and then you should be sitting pretty. You should be having some, I hope, massive utility of like, yes, I did something, and you did something with this module. Well done. Because I know it sounds scary. I hope you were scared. I hope you're less scared now. If you're not, tweet me. I'll help you. But hey, finish all that stuff up, and you know where to find me. I'll be here waiting for you with your next module. But hey, in the meantime, take care. Stay safe.